There are many ways to learn Japanese, and one of them is reading a kanji dictionary from cover to cover. That method is not really the easiest one, though, because most of the words you will come across you won't even use on a day-to-day basis, so it becomes really hard to memorize all of them. I actually tried this with this book right here called the Kanji Dictionary, which I purchased from Amazon. It's actually a very good book because it contains literally every kanji symbol in the Japanese language. In fact, it was the first dictionary I bought that every time I looked up a kanji symbol, I could find it. The first kanji dictionary I bought only had the 2,000 symbols that are used in newspapers, so it wasn't that good. But this one contains every symbol, and while I don't really read it from cover to cover, it's a really good source for looking up letters you come across, like if you're translating a song or watching a TV show. It's actually very helpful for that. Another method is to get a Japanese calendar, like this one that I got from Amazon. It's a bullet train calendar, and the best part about it is inside the calendar, you get a glimpse of how holidays actually work in Japan, like what they celebrate there and what their holidays are called versus what holidays are like in our country, which is actually pretty helpful because it tells you something about their culture. And usually what I do is when I come across a holiday I've never heard of, I'll research it and figure out what it's for. On Japanese calendars, for each day of the week, they have these words next to it that are, I'm not really sure what they mean, but they're apparently words that are telling you when would be a good time to gamble on that weekday. Now, this next method I'm about to tell you about is using Wikipedia, because most articles on Wikipedia actually have an option to switch the language. What I usually do is I'll switch the language to Japanese, and then I'll learn some vocabulary about the subject I'm interested in, like, for example, the human eye or the bullet train, and I'll pick up a lot of words on those subjects from that website. Okay, this method includes buying Japanese media. Amazon.com or the Japanese version, Amazon.co.jp, are very good sources for this. With Amazon.com, usually if you type the name of a media, for example, a DVD or a video game, and then just put import behind it in the search engine, you'll usually find the Japanese import being sold on the website. Or on Amazon.co.jp, type the Japanese title of the product you're looking for. The only problem with this is it's pretty expensive, because with DVDs or video games, for example, you would also need to purchase the Japanese version of the console you want to play them on, which is very expensive. For example, a PlayStation 2 in Japan costs like $200, even though it only costs like $99 here in America. So that's something to look out for. Now, if you're going to learn Japanese through media, there are a few things you should be careful of, which we will cover in a little bit. When using a video game, it's best to use one that has a subtitle options for several reasons. One of which is that the characters don't talk very coherently, and another reason would be because they don't talk like people, they talk like cartoons. So they're not really the best to learn how to actually pronounce the words from. The only real benefit from playing video games in Japanese is to learn more vocabulary, but not necessarily grammar, because the characters don't always use correct grammar in the game. Another thing is they don't talk right either, so not the best sources to learn how to actually say the words either. Most Japanese PlayStation 2 games are really good for beginners because their subtitle options use hiragana and katakana. These games are good for learning vocabulary, especially if you're a beginner. And to turn the subtitle options on in Japanese games, you usually just press the pause button. Look for the one that says option, which means options, and then look for jimak, which means subtitles. If you can't find that in options, the chances are the game doesn't have that option. And then it'll usually have two options, one that says off, which means off, and another one that says on, which means on. Obviously, click the one that says on to turn them on. Now, a few things to be aware of if you use that one specific game for learning Japanese. One of them is when Clank talks in this game, he ends the sentence in the word su, which is technically a real word, but it's actually don't use this word because it's only for like little children that haven't really learned how to use use the formal form of a word in the formal form of a sentence, And this is basically how he would use it in a sentence. He would basically just say a normal sentence in its informal form, and then he would put "su" behind it. Probably because he doesn't know how to change it into a formal sentence. And this is not really something you should do if you're like my age, which is 20, because you would look weird doing that. So that's one thing to be aware of. PlayStation 3 games in Japanese are very good for intermediate speakers because, unlike the PlayStation 2 counterparts, they actually use kanji. So they're very good for learning new kanji symbols that you haven't seen yet. A little thing you should be aware of, though. For kanji symbols to display properly on your TV, you need to have an HD TV. I once had one of those old TVs, you know, the ones that aren't in HD, and the symbols didn't appear properly, and I had a really hard time reading them. I couldn't really use the PlayStation 3 for this method until I got an HD TV. So that's something to be aware of. This is actually a good Japanese game to learn the language from because it uses it teaches you stuff like a vocabulary on outer space, planetary this and stuff like that. So it's actually really good for vocabulary, and of course you'll learn a lot of kanji using the subtitle option. The subtitle option is really good on this too, and it actually teaches you far more vocabulary than the last game I just showed you. And the best way to actually learn Japanese from this game is when you're in the level and you're trying to figure out where you're supposed to go, talk to each and every one of the people there that give you the clues on what you should do next, and then you look up every single word you don't know. By using that method, I now have this really large list of words that I now have to learn in order to get further through the game because this game uses a lot of complicated kanji symbols and a lot of intermediate Japanese. So yeah, it's actually a really good source to learn Japanese from. Now what I want to cover is anime. Now, a lot of websites say anime is not a good source for learning Japanese. It actually is if you use it correctly. The problem is most people don't use it correctly. They just watch the show and assume that words are going to just, pop into their head like magic or something. But the proper way to do it is, and this is really for the intermediate speakers, not really for the beginner, is because a beginner won't really be fluent enough to be able to catch what they're hearing. But what you're supposed to do is you take a journal like this one, and when someone says a word that you don't understand, just write it down and then write the hiragana pronunciation of the word, and then type it in Google Translate and press spacebar, and usually the word that the person said will show up, and you will be able to learn that word. And that's really the correct way to learn words from anime shows. This method can be hard sometimes. For example, if the character in the show speaks really fast, like for example the narrator of an anime show, it may take a while to actually pick up what he said. For example, on one episode of One Piece, the narrator says mokuron, which means to plan or plot something, usually like an evil plan or something. And I couldn't hear every single syllable he said because of how fast he was talking. Instead of mokuron, I thought I heard mokuram, which is not a real word. So obviously, I had a lot of trouble actually finding that word. When this happens, there is one method that sometimes works for getting the correct pronunciation you're looking for. What I did was I typed the spelling I thought I heard in the Google search engine, and what it did was it autocorrected what I spelled and gave me results for this word. And since it sounded almost like the word I heard, it meant something that that sounds like it could have been what the person was talking about, I knew it had to be the correct word. So sometimes if you can't come up with a word on Google Translate, you probably spelt it wrong. Typing it in the search engine sometimes fixes this problem. One thing to be mindful of about anime is, like video games, the characters don't always talk like real humans, so they're not always good sources to learn how to pronounce the words from. Also, a lot of anime characters talk very rudely compared to how you should talk in real life. So, if you talk like these characters, you're very likely to come off as rude to the person you're talking to. So that's also something to watch out for. However, they can be good sources for learning vocabulary. A lot of vocabulary. The crazy thing is, some people on this one website I was on, this person said that the only word they learned from watching One Piece was baka, which means idiot. But this right here, this is a list of words I learned from the exact same show, and it actually a whole page with the words, and it actually covers an entire half of the next page. These are all words I learned from like 3 episodes of watching the show, and I also learned at least one new word with each episode. So, and that's because I used the correct method. But again, do not try to talk like these characters because they are pretty rude.